It was supposed to be just another routine traffic stop, a speeding car, a cautious officer, and the usual questions. But when Officer Ryan peered into the back seat, his entire demeanor changed. His face went pale, his hands trembled, and his heart pounded like a drum. The reason? A tiny puppy staring back at him, with eyes full of innocence. What happened next? No one could have predicted. Police officers see all kinds of things on the job: speeding drivers, reckless behavior, and even dangerous criminals. But Officer Ryan never expected a simple traffic stop to shake him to his core. At first, it was a normal interaction, but when he noticed something in the back seat, everything changed. It wasn't just any puppy. It was a painful reminder of something buried deep in his past. And in a matter of seconds, the officer had a choice to make: follow the law or follow his heart. The night air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of asphalt and distant rain. It was one of those shifts where time seemed to crawl, where the radio stayed eerily silent, and where Officer Ryan found himself staring at the dim glow of the dashboard clock, watching each second tick away. 2:13 a.m. Another slow night. He exhaled heavily, shifting in his seat. The coffee in his cup holder had long since turned cold, but he took a sip anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. Patrol shifts like these were predictable. A couple of minor infractions, maybe a reckless driver, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would stick with him once he clocked out. At least, that's what he thought. Then, out of nowhere, headlights sliced through the darkness. A black sedan zoomed past, speeding down the empty road, its tires barely touching the pavement before hitting the next stretch. Ryan's instincts kicked in before his mind fully processed what was happening. He flicked on his cruiser's lights. Red and blue strobes shattered the quiet of the night, painting the road in flashes of urgency. He pressed his foot against the gas, catching up to the vehicle as it slowed, the driver reluctantly pulling over to the side. Ryan let out a small sigh. Routine stop, license and registration, same old, same old. Yet, as he reached for his flashlight and stepped out of his car, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a feeling that settled in his gut like an unwelcome weight. The black sedan idled under the dim glow of a street lamp, its engine still humming softly. He approached with measured steps, hand resting near his belt, not out of fear, just habit. You never knew what you were walking into. Through the windshield, he could see the driver, a middle-aged man gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. His knuckles were pale, his shoulders rigid. Ryan tapped on the window. The man hesitated before rolling it down. A gust of stale air escaped the car's interior, carrying a mix of worn-out leather, cheap fast food, and something else, something subtle but unsettling. Ryan ignored it for now. "Evening, sir," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The man let out a nervous chuckle. I might have been going a little fast." Ryan studied him. Something in his voice didn't sit right. A little too forced, a little too rehearsed. He nodded. "License and registration, please." The man fumbled with the glove compartment, his fingers moving quicker than necessary, almost like he was rushing through the motions. Ryan casually swept his flashlight around the interior. Dashboard clean, passenger seat empty, no open containers, no visible contraband. Everything looked normal, until he glanced at the back seat. His breath caught in his throat. A tiny, trembling puppy sat inside a worn-out cardboard box, pressed against the fabric as if trying to disappear. Ryan blinked, momentarily thrown off. His grip on the flashlight tightened. The puppy's fur was damp, its tiny ribs barely concealed beneath a coat of soft golden strands. But that wasn't what stopped Ryan cold. It was the eyes. Big, round, innocent, and painfully familiar. A strange chill crawled up Ryan's spine, even though the night air wasn't particularly cold. His pulse, steady moments ago, now thrummed slightly faster beneath his skin. He wasn't sure why. Not yet. But something deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in years, told him that this was no ordinary traffic stop, that this wasn't just a puppy. It was a memory, a ghost of something he had tried to forget. Ryan forced himself to breathe, keeping his expression neutral. "Sir," he said slowly, his voice carrying a different weight now. "Where did you get that dog?" The driver stiffened. Ryan didn't miss the way his fingers tightened around the edge of his steering wheel. "What?" The man let out a forced chuckle. I just found it." Ryan's jaw clenched. A lie. He had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when someone was hiding something. The man spoke too quickly, looked away too fast. His eyes darted left, right, anywhere but at Ryan. "Found it where?" Ryan pressed, his voice even, but firmer now. The man swallowed. "Outside a gas station." Ryan raised an eyebrow. Which one? The man hesitated. A second too long. The one on, Jefferson Street, he finally said. Ryan tilted his head. There was no gas station on Jefferson Street. Silence hung between them for a moment, thick and unspoken. The puppy let out a small, helpless whimper. Ryan felt his chest tighten. The sound shouldn't have hit him the way it did, but it did, because suddenly, he was no longer standing on this empty road, no longer speaking to some stranger in the dead of night. Instead, he was back in an alleyway, 4 years ago, kneeling beside another dog, a golden retriever, ribs visible beneath matted fur, gasping for breath as the cold seeped into its fragile body. He had tried to save it, tried to wrap his uniform jacket around its frail form, tried to tell it that it was safe, that it wasn't alone anymore. But some wounds run too deep, and that night, he had watched it take its last breath. The memory crashed into him like a wave, raw and unforgiving. Ryan's grip on the flashlight tightened. The weight in his chest was unbearable now. He stared at the puppy in the back seat. The same color, the same fragile frame. Was this some kind of cruel déjà vu, or was fate giving him another chance? He swallowed hard, pushing the memory down. This wasn't about him. This was about the puppy, and the man who clearly wasn't telling him the truth. Ryan exhaled slowly, composing himself. "Step out of the car," he said. The man blinked. "What? Why? Now?" The man hesitated. "Officer, I swear." I said now. Ryan's tone left no room for argument. The driver hesitated, then reluctantly pushed open the door. Ryan stepped back, keeping a close eye on him. Something wasn't right, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. Ryan took a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the car door to steady himself. For a split second, he wasn't here, not on this deserted stretch of road, not on duty, not standing under the glow of his cruiser's flashing lights. No, for a split second, he was somewhere else, somewhere colder, somewhere darker. Years ago, a rookie cop, a freezing alley, a golden retriever barely clinging to life. He could still feel it, the way the dog's frail body had shuddered in his arms, how its breath had come in shallow, broken gasps, how he had pressed his palm against its fragile ribcage, feeling the faint thump of a heartbeat fighting against the inevitable, how he had whispered, "You're not alone, I've got you, just hold on." And how, despite all his prayers, all his desperate attempts to keep it alive, the dog had exhaled one last time, its eyes softening as if it had finally given up. That night had never left him. It had clung to him like a shadow, lingering at the back of his mind, creeping into his dreams, filling his chest with an ache that never truly went away. And now here he was, again. Ryan blinked rapidly, forcing himself back to the present. The puppy in the backseat whimpered, shifting slightly in the cardboard box, its tiny body trembling. It looked so small, so vulnerable. His fingers curled into a fist. He turned back to the driver, voice tight. "Where did you get this puppy?" The man shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "I found it." Ryan didn't react, didn't blink, didn't move. He had heard that answer 1,000 times before. "I see." His voice was calm, unreadable. "Found it where?" The driver hesitated. His gaze flickered. "Left, right, anywhere but at Ryan. Outside a gas station." "Which gas station?" The man rubbed the back of his neck. "One over on Jefferson Street." Ryan's stomach clenched. "There is no gas station on Jefferson Street." Silence, the kind that made your skin crawl. Ryan inhaled deeply through his nose, his grip tightening on the car door. He studied the man's face, the way his fingers twitched slightly, the nervous swallow, the flickering eyes. A liar through and through. And yet, Ryan didn't immediately react. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of it settle between them. The puppy made a small noise, a whimper so faint that it barely broke the quiet. Ryan's jaw clenched. He looked at the tiny creature again, curled up in that battered box, its fur slightly damp, not drenched, but damp. He narrowed his eyes. "Did it rain tonight?" he asked casually. The man blinked, caught off guard. "What? You said you found it in the rain." Ryan's tone was light, almost conversational. "Did it rain tonight?" The driver's mouth opened, then shut. His brain scrambled for an answer. He licked his lips. I meant earlier today. It was drizzling in the morning." Ryan tilted his head slightly. "Was it?" The man swallowed hard. Ryan already knew the answer. He had been on patrol the entire evening. The roads had been dry. Not a single raindrop had fallen. Another lie. And now, Ryan was certain, this wasn't just a lost puppy story. Something was off. Way off. He straightened, exhaling slowly. "Step out of the car." The man's eyes widened. What? Why? Step out. of the car. His tone left no room for argument. The man hesitated for half a second too long, then finally, reluctantly, pushed the door open and stepped onto the pavement. His movements were stiff, awkward, like a man caught in a lie he wasn't prepared to defend. Ryan gave him a once-over. Jeans, slightly scuffed boots, a jacket zipped up all the way to his throat. Even though the night wasn't particularly cold, he had the look of someone hiding something. Ryan took a slow step toward him, lowering his voice. "You want to try again?" The man let out a forced chuckle. "Officer, I swear, I was just trying to help. Helping doesn't come with lies." Ryan's eyes darkened. "Where did you get the puppy?" The man's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, a noise, soft, muffled, but enough to make Ryan's blood run cold. It came from inside the car. A tiny whimper, but not from the puppy in the back seat. Another one. Ryan's heart slammed against his ribs. His pulse quickened. His fingers instinctively dropped to the grip of his holster. "You mind popping the trunk for me?" Ryan's voice was eerily calm. The man stiffened. I don't see why that's necessary." Ryan took a deliberate step forward. "Trunk, now." The man hesitated. His breath came out shaky. And then, without warning, he ran. Ryan's instincts exploded. "Hey!" His muscles coiled, and before he could even think, he was chasing. The man bolted across the pavement, his feet slamming against the ground, but Ryan was faster. Years of training, years of pursuit, years of chasing people who thought they could outrun justice. In 3 seconds flat, Ryan was on him. A hard shove, a stumble, and then the man hit the ground, face first, breath whooshing out of him as Ryan pinned him down. "Hands behind your back," Ryan barked, yanking out his cuffs. The man squirmed, gasping, but it was over. Click, metal snapped around his wrists. Ryan exhaled sharply, his heart pounding in his ears. Then, without wasting another second, he turned back to the car. He strode toward it, his jaw set, his hand steady despite the storm raging inside him. He reached the trunk and popped it open, and that's when his stomach dropped. Inside, a tiny crate, a bundle of fur. Not just one, not two, four tiny puppies, barely weeks old, crammed inside with no food, no water, no warmth. Ryan's breath hitched. The sight burned into his mind. The tiny creatures were curled up against each other, their fragile bodies shivering, their tiny chests rising and falling in uneven gasps. One of them lifted its little head, blinking at him with the same round, innocent eyes. Ryan's throat tightened. This wasn't just neglect. This was cruelty. This man, this liar, was transporting them somewhere. For what? To sell? To dump? Ryan didn't know, and he didn't care, because now those puppies were safe, because he had found them, because tonight he would not lose them. Not again. Never again. The law was clear. Ryan knew what he was supposed to do. Call animal control. Let them handle it. Fill out the paperwork. Report the incident and move on. That was the protocol. But protocols didn't have a heart. And right now, staring at the trembling puppy in the back seat of a stranger's car, his heart was louder than the law. He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching at his side. He could already picture how this would play out if he followed procedure. The puppy would be taken to a shelter. If it was lucky, it would get a warm place to sleep, a few kind hands to care for it. But shelters were overcrowded. Puppies this young, this fragile, didn't always make it through the system. And the worst part, Ryan had seen it before. He had worked cases where dogs were seized, taken to facilities, and never found homes. Not two, four tiny puppies, barely weeks old, crammed inside with no food, no water, no warmth. Ryan's breath hitched. The sight burned into his mind. The tiny creatures were curled up against each other, their fragile bodies shivering, their tiny chests rising and falling in uneven gasps. Ryan's throat tightened. This wasn't just neglect. This was cruelty. This man, this liar, was transporting them somewhere. For what? To sell? To dump? Ryan didn't know, because he had found them. That was the protocol. His heart was louder than the law. He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching at his side. It would get a warm place to sleep. Puppies this young, this fragile, and the worst part, taken to facilities, and never found homes. He had walked through shelters lined with metal cages, hearing the desperate whines of dogs who wanted nothing more than someone to love them. And far too often, he had read the final reports. Unadopted, no space, humane euthanasia administered. His stomach twisted at the thought. He exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. Damn it, this wasn't supposed to be personal. The driver, still standing awkwardly beside the car, must have sensed Ryan's hesitation. Look, officer, the man started, his voice softer now, almost pleading. I know this looks bad, but I promise, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was taking it home. I have kids, they love dogs. We were gonna keep it, give it a good life. Ryan's eyes flicked up, studying him. His gut told him the man had lied before. The whole, I found it in the range story had been flimsy at best. But was this lie or truth? The man's expression had changed now, less defensive, more genuine. Ryan glanced at the puppy again. It was so small, barely old enough to be away from its mother. It looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, as if waiting to be told what would happen next. He imagined it alone in the cold, shivering, hungry, waiting for someone, anyone, to care. A memory flashed in his mind, the golden retriever from years ago. The way it had trusted him, even in its final moments. The way he had whispered, I've got you. But he hadn't, not really. His fingers curled into a fist at his side. This time had to be different. It has to be different. Ryan took a deep breath. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached into his pocket. The driver flinched slightly, as if expecting a citation book, a fine, something official. But instead, Ryan pulled out his wallet. The man blinked, confused. Ryan's voice was softer now, but there was an edge to it. An edge that meant he wasn't just making a suggestion. He was making a deal. Listen, he said, steady and firm. If you're serious about keeping this dog, take it to a vet first thing tomorrow. Get it checked. Get it vaccinated. If you don't, I'll find out. His tone left no room for negotiation. The man's eyes widened. I will. I swear. Ryan studied him, searching for any sign of deception, any flicker of doubt. But the man looked sincere. Maybe not entirely trustworthy, but sincere. The puppy made a tiny noise, a whimper so soft it was almost a whisper. Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he reached out and gently stroked the puppy's head. His fingertips barely brushed against the soft golden fur, but it was enough. The puppy let out a small sigh, pressing into his touch. And something inside Ryan, something heavy, something painful, shifted. It wasn't gone, but for the first time in years, it felt lighter. His past wasn't erased, but maybe, just maybe, his future didn't have to carry the same weight. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe he wouldn't have to whisper, I've got you, and feel like a liar. Maybe, for once, he could actually save something, even if it was just one life, even if it was just this one, tiny, helpless soul. Ryan exhaled, standing up straight. He nodded once, firm but final. Take care of him. The man nodded quickly. I will. I swear. Ryan lingered for a moment, then took a step back. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away, his boots crunching against the pavement. He didn't need to say anything else. The moment had already spoken for itself. And as he slid back into his patrol car, gripping the steering wheel a little less tightly than before, Ryan knew he wouldn't forget tonight. He wouldn't forget this feeling. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to. Ryan stepped back, his hand resting on the cool metal of his patrol car, watching the black sedan pull away. The taillights flickered in the darkness, glowing red for a moment before fading into the night. He didn't move, not right away. Instead, he stood there, the hum of the distant highway filling the silence, his mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. Had he done the right thing? He wasn't sure. By the book, maybe not. He should have called animal control, followed procedure, let the system take care of it. But the system had failed before. It had failed that golden retriever years ago, the one Ryan had held in his arms, whispering hollow reassurances as it took its final breath. He could still feel the weight of that moment, the way it had settled into his chest like a stone, dragging him down ever since. And yet, tonight felt different. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had just watched another life slip through his fingers. This time, he had chosen differently. This time, he had believed in a different outcome. Ryan inhaled slowly, the crisp night air filling his lungs, grounding him. Maybe the driver was telling the truth. Maybe right now, that puppy was curled up on the lap of an excited child, its tiny tail wagging as it found warmth, comfort, and love for the first time. Or maybe the man had lied. Maybe he had just been saying what Ryan wanted to hear. That was the risk, wasn't it? Trust. Trust that people could be better than they seemed. Trust that second chances, real second chances, were worth giving. Ryan had spent years shutting himself off from that kind of thinking. He had seen too much of the world's cruelty to believe in happy endings. But that puppy, it had looked at him with hope. Hope that someone would do the right thing. Hope that, just this once, the world wouldn't be so cruel. And Ryan had wanted to believe in that hope. Not just for the puppy, for himself, because deep down, Maybe he needed this second chance, just as much as that tiny, trembling creature in the back seat. Maybe tonight wasn't just about saving a dog. Maybe it was about saving a part of himself, the part that still believed in kindness, the part that hadn't completely hardened, the part that still wanted to make a difference. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head as he ran a hand through his hair. The radio on his shoulder crackled to life. Unit 12, status check. He reached for it, pressing the button. All clear. His voice was steady, calmer than before. Back on patrol. A pause. Then, copy that. Ryan glanced once more at the empty road ahead, where the sedan had disappeared into the night. Then, with a quiet sigh, he slid into his patrol car, gripping the wheel. As he pulled back onto the road, streetlights casting long shadows against the pavement, he felt something shift inside him. The weight in his chest wasn't gone, but it wasn't as heavy as before. And maybe, just maybe that was enough. For tonight at least. Because sometimes, change didn't come in grand, sweeping moments. Sometimes, it was in the small choices, the quiet decisions, the moments when you chose hope over doubt. Tonight, Ryan had made one of those choices, and he wasn't sure what would happen next. But as he drove down that dark, empty road, for the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. For the puppy, and for him. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. You won't want to miss the next one.